Alright, welcome back. Now we're going to talk about actual examples about how to solve the derivative of inverse trig functions. So in the last video, we actually derived sine inverse. Now we're just going to use the derivative in order to take the derivative of sine inverse of more complicated functions. So the first function we're going to be taking the derivative of is sine inverse of x squared. So here we go. Now pay close attention that right here is an inside piece of sine inverse. So when we take the derivative of that, we're going to need the chain rule. So recall that the derivative of sine inverse of x is equal to 1 divided by the square root of 1 minus x squared. So we're going to be using that piece of information to take the derivative. So the derivative of sine inverse is 1 divided by the square root of 1 minus whatever is inside of the parentheses. So in this case it was x, and in this case it's x squared, quantity squared. Now what you need to do is use the chain rule by multiplying by the derivative of x squared. So again, we're taking the derivative of this whole inside piece. So then we're going to get 1 divided by the square root of 1 minus x to the fourth times 2x. So our final answer is 2x divided by the square root of 1 minus x to the fourth. And that's it. This is the derivative of this function. Okay, so now I want you guys to try this one on your own. The derivative of sine inverse of the square root of x. So right now, take a minute and try to take the derivative. My hint is to rewrite this as d dx sine inverse of x to the 1/2. That might help a little more. Alright, so now let's take the derivative. So we get that this is equal to 1 divided by the square root of 1 minus x to the 1/2 squared. Again, this whole piece gets placed right inside the parentheses, and then multiplied by the derivative of x to the 1/2. So here we're going to get 1 divided by the square root of 1 minus x to the 1/2 squared is just x times 1/2 x to the negative 1/2. So from here you're going to get 1 divided by the square root of 1 minus x times 1 over 2 x to the 1/2. And then simplifying that, you get 1 divided by 2 square root of x times the square root of 1 minus x. And you could simplify that by distributing in that square root of x, but it's fine just like that. Alright, next thing's next. So the rest of the inverse trig functions can be derived in a very similar fashion as we derived sine inverse. So if you would like to derive them or seen a derivation of them, I can put another video with the derivatives on there, or you can look on Khan Academy. So here are all of the derivatives of each one. They're very similar, so be careful as to not mix them up. The derivative of sine inverse, as we saw, is the square root of 1 minus x squared. The derivative of cosine inverse is negative 1 divided by the square root of 1 minus x squared, and so on. It's also very important to note the domains of each one. Notice that with sine inverse and cosine inverse, x has to be less than 1. And for cosecant and secant inverse, x has to be greater than 1. This is because underneath this square root right here, if you're larger than 1, it becomes undefined. And here, if you're smaller than 1, it becomes undefined. For tangent inverse, you can use any x value.